Hey folks, so a question came up on Stack Overflow that created an opportunity to give folks who couldn't attend our OpenSci a peek into what one of the packages that we ended up starting to create there can do. It's called middlechild, and I am not going into all the nuances of what this exactly does and how to install it, etc. That's for a whole other thing, and we can do a blog post or whatever for that. But I wanted to show you guys that it's really useful for making your life easier when you have to figure out how to scrape something from a website that you might want to use programmatically later on, but you don't know how to get access to the data or formulate the httr requests. And the good example is this particular Stack Overflow question that's up on the screen. It's someone trying to fill in a form on a website to get data out. I mean, it's a very common task that we have. There's no real API for this site, so it's kind of like a hidden API since you are posting a form to it. And they want to be able to post this data and get the file back and do that programmatically. So they probably want to change that information over time and get different, extracts from the site. And this would be the site that it is, and it's very 90s-esque. Looks like it hasn't been updated in a very long time. And it's a basic site where you drop in the station ID, start date, end date, do some stuff, and click extract, and it's going to post the form, do some back-end processing, and spit back a file that you can eventually use. And we want to be able to programmatically create the same structure for that thing, and we could do lots of ways to actually do that, right? So we could open up developer tools and like pick on go to the network tab and start to monitor requests that come in and see what gets posted. A lot of people are intimidated by developer tools. You can't really break anything with developer tools, just reload the page. But the reality is it's not everyone's cup of tea, like digging into stuff like that. So we won't do that here. But what we will do is we will use middlechild, which is a package that we wrote to create a proxy server that's controlled by R and creates data that's readable by R. So it's going to record all the stuff that we do on our browser to then be able to examine what those requests are and potentially make requests from them. Sometimes you're just going to want to use the data from the thing as well too. And it's based upon a really great tool called man-in-the-middle proxy. And not a whole, I'm not going to spend 20 minutes going over what this is, but basically this sits on your system or somewhere else on your network if you want to put it there. You point your system proxy or browser proxy to it. Everything you do with your browser goes through it. It captures all of those things. It can do tons more than just capture. What we're going to do with it and what we do with it with middlechild is we capture the information, store it, and then make it available back to R as data that you can then use. Going into and out of the system proxy settings on any system is a royal pain, and trying to do that regularly to switch back and forth to do various things is also kind of a royal pain. So one thing that I like to do for at least Firefox, the new Firefox Quantum Developer Edition, is there's this extension called Proxy Switcher and Manager, and so far it seems to be pretty benign. I've been using it for a few months. I have not seen it try to do anything really evil. Yes, extensions can do very evil things to your browsers. Remember that. So what we're going to do is I've already configured it to kind of set up to work with the man-in-the-middle proxy. So again, I'm not going to go over how to set up the package. You can read through the instructions. You can file some issues so we can clarify documentation for how to do that. There's just a few steps you have to do, and the man-in-the-middle proxy instructions themselves off the MIT and proxy site are actually pretty darn good. That's a pretty robust tool. It's been around for a while. The folks do a great job building and creating the documentation for it. So hopefully that's not too hard to get installed and working with your environment. And once you do that, you have to actually point your browser to it as a proxy. And again, not going to go over some of the details of this, but basically it's going to sit on this port. We're going to connect to it, the localhost on this port, and then everything from our browser is going to go through there. So we're going to try to keep that limited for this particular example that we're doing. And the example that we're going to do is this. So I've got the middlechild package already loaded. You'll have to do the install and get that done, like I was saying. And then we need to start the man-in-the-middle proxy, and I guess I could type it better than that. There we go. We're starting it and we're saving it with this file format. There's two different ways you can save the output of it. One has httr requests, and one as har output. The problem with saving it as httr request is right now they don't store the browser post the data the way I've got the backend set up for it. It will eventually, but the har format, which is a lot more detailed and more comprehensive, it's an archive format for replicating what you do in a browser. It's really used generally in more context for browser performance measurement. We're using it to actually capture the data for this thing. So we're starting up the proxy. You saw the proxy start up on here. We're going to capture all the information in this har format, and then we'll use the har format later to be able to find out what we want from the server. So let's go back to the browser, and we'll go back to the thing here. We've already switched the proxy over. You might have seen some requests go through it already. And this is a really bad site. I mean, there's a lot of really bad sites. A lot of .gov sites really horrible in the U.S. This is a really bad site because we're gonna I'm gonna just reload this so that everything reloads and just kind of have it go through there. I'm going to run the extract. This may or may not work the first time, and this isn't related to the proxy. This is related to the site. So what this did is it popped up a little browser pop-up saying, hey, yes, I've got your file. Let's take it out there. We aren't going to save this file. We don't need the file contents. I mean, if you want to save it, go for it. But we actually don't need that. We're going to turn the proxy off now because I don't want to capture any more data than we already have. So we've captured quite a bit from that session. You can see it keeps a running log to tell you what's going on. Kind of reminds you that you've still got it running as well too, is what that's good for. And now we're going to stop this proxy. I want to bring up the help for this real quick. And why I'm doing that is I want to go over some of the options. So we capture this process ID object when we start it, and we use that later on because it's got a lot of metadata that the stop man in the middle thing uses to figure stuff out. Like this probably would have been better as like a reference object or an R6 object. In retrospect, we might do that or have that as an alternate thing, because an alternate option for this, just because everything is pretty self-contained when you do that. Here you've got to manage the output of it yourself and pass that around, and it's great for piping and other things, but maybe this wasn't the best context for it here. And so file an issue if you'd rather see it as an R6 object as well too. So for this one, we need to pass it into there, and there's two options: one for reading the har file in, or the httr file in, or we need to read in, or we could save it and save it. So we're going to do both. We're going to read it in and we're going to save it. That way we can post-process that har file whenever we want. So that kind of helps us save it around. It also means that you can, like, when you're debugging things, you can have the file that you've already used to debug things and not have to constantly go back to the proxy server and grab those things. So we're going to, it's going to make we're going to a response. Let's do a response, and we'll basically stop. Yeah, it's a bad day for Python. We're going to save it out to my data directory as a har file. We won't use it in this session, but I'm just going to do that so you can see what happens. So we're doing that. So it's stopping the proxy server. It's not going to handle any more requests. We've saved the dump file, and we actually have an object in memory now that has a pretty large set of responses. Like, it literally captures everything, including images and any media or whatever is going on inside there. So we may create options to not do that. There's ways of doing that as by passing command line things to the man-in-the-middle proxy, but we'll try to make it easier for everybody when you're doing it. And we can take a look at this object just by typing in the har entry object itself, because that's what it actually ends up creating, is pretty nice. It's got a really nice print method, so we don't have to see a whole structure print to that and scroll through and have our console all corrupted and things. So we can see a bunch of those things on there, and you can see that it actually grabs a ton of stuff. Like, there's more than one entry here. It isn't just one entry, and there's just a ton of things that we could sift through to try to find. And we're going to attempt to try to find the post request, and again, we'll probably make some helpers along the way to do this. But now that you've actually got an R object that you can play with, look at, and go into detail for. So but we can take a look at what this actually is, and we can see that there's a log entry in there, and there's some entries in there, and that's what all these things over here are for the entries. And what we'll do is, let's go up here and bring in the tidyverse for a second. And so one thing that to try to find the post request, and one reason why we know it's a post request is We didn't see any extra get request variables up here in the in the query string. It doesn't necessarily always guarantee it's a post request if you don't see those up there, because it can use redirects to make things look different, etc. But for this particular one, it really does look like it's a form with a post request. We can look at the form itself to see if it actually is using a form data as well too. And it looks like it's even got frames, so it's even worse than normal. Wow, I really hate this site. And we can take a look to see here if we have forms. So let's take a look and see if there is a form. And form with action with not so form with that particular action of nothing, and it not having a specifier that it's using get means it's going to do a post. And so it's going to take that data, it's going to do a post for that data, and which it actually did. And we can find that post information if we kind of do some fun things here. So we can, for each entry, we can actually take a look at one entry if you want to. We'll do that first. We can, the entries consist of like the date and time of the request, the actual request itself, the response that came back, anything else that is related to the har entry. And you can look up the har file format. It's got a ton of information on it. We can take a look at what's inside the request. And the request is $. The request is the URL that we grabbed, what version, what method was used, and this is what we're going to try to do to find the post request in that mix of 19 odd har entries that we have. So what we can do is we can do this here. We'll take the entries, and we will say and we can see which one of our entries has the post request in it. And it looks like the entry with the post request in it is entry number 19. So let's just take a really quick look at entry number 19. We'll take a pretty big look at it here. We can scroll back a little bit to see what's in there. So entry 19 shows a ton of information, and here's the particular request, and we could focus just on that if you want, but it actually shows that it captures the method, the URL, the version, all the cookies that got sent. So if we actually do entry.request and make that 2, we should be able to see the same thing we just saw there. So we'll take it down to 3, and now you can see the details of what we got back, right? You've got the cookies that it created and sent and is managing for you, lots of cookies. There is no query string, but there is a bunch of post data, and this is the post data that it sent. It sent it in JSON format, and this is the textual version of the JSON. So this is the data that it forced to there. And this is enough information for you to, on your own, if you so chose, to make an httr function out of. You could go through and capture those those individual bits and do that. So one thing that we're trying to do is make your life easier with this package. We initially created it to help test packages out for security, safety, what URLs they call to validate what's happening. I think Noam Ross is working on some things for that with some of the testing stuff he's building for our OpenSci. But we're going to try to use this to build an httr request automagically. And what I mean by that is I took some guts out of my curl converter package that is no longer on CRAN. It will probably not go back on CRAN for a whole host of reasons. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass it in this entry that we found, number 19. And if everything goes well, we should get back an HTTR request pre-built for us that we can then use and to duplicate this exact request and get the data back, and then we can also use it to modify it and kind of make it and parameterize it and kind of do lots of fun things with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this be an HTTR function. So I'm just saving that out. It's not going to print it to the screen just because it's a function, so I'm not going to print a function to the screen unless I want to. And we could print it out with one of the parameters here. If the quiet was false, it will actually send the output to the screen as well too. So we could do that because it's a little better formatted than what comes back into there. But actually, we'll do that. So we're going to do that, and if I could spell, it'd be great. So here, so we took that entry, and what it did is it went through all of that structure for you and built this verb request. And it is, and I'm going to copy and paste this information into a different tab because we're going to use that in a second. And we can also take a look at the httr function just to prove to you that it actually did create the function itself too. So in theory, if I were to just call this function, it's going to go out, it's going to make the same call, post the same data, and this is a pretty big output, so I'm not really going to kind of give everything to the screen, but let's take a look at what the response looks like. So the response that we get back, this is the httr response object. It's give us all the information that we have back, and what I'm looking for here is the actual response. And the actual response is content here. And it returned a giant blob of information back. And that's really good for us because it's actually a series of JSON. And what I will do, where's it, res? And I will do that just so you can see that it did return both the status code. So in the JSON response, we got the status, the entire report. It's a gosh awful fixed with format stuff. I mean, yes, reading fixed format's fast, but this is terrible. The documentation is really sketchy for it. If you go back to that, if you do need this type of data, go back to that Stack Overflow question that I showed earlier, and I do have how to parse that data out too because it was terrible. It's horrible stuff. But we actually have the whole report there, so this is pretty darn cool. Except, we can run this function, we get it once, which is sort of helpful, but it's not really helpful, right? Because you want to parameterize something like this. And the one reason why I have it spit back the code into ways you can actually use it is because really you want to be able to use this and parameterize it and make it way more useful than it is now. So just by doing a little bit of tweaking to the source code, it comes out as nice as it's going to come out for right now. If you want to make a pull request to make it nicer, we do it gladly accept pull requests. Right here. So I just did that to make things a little bit more readable. Generally, when I'm doing this, I would spend some iterative time to see exactly which headers are and aren't required. There's really no point in sending those types of headers if you don't need to. I would also, if I were doing this for reals and this was going to be a function I use regularly or build it into a package, add a user agent string that lets people know what it is. I wouldn't just fake that I'm a Mozilla browser for this. And what we can do is if we go back to the website, we can see on the website that here are the form fields for those things. So where's the input is the different types of names for the actual input and the schedule for everything, and they map really nicely to what these things are here. So we'd have to figure out what the input formats are for some of these things and for the station ID. But at a minimum, I know off the top of my head because we filled in the form that the station ID is this character object, the start date is a date string and in ISO format, and the end date is also that as well too. So what we can do is and we'll just take this here. And we don't really, since we know we're actually doing a post request, it's easier to build it with that particular way instead of actually doing that. We can switch it out for post. And now we could do some serious error checking here for the parameters if you want to. We're not going to do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to make this station ID and we are going to now have a function that we can call. And so we're going to call that function now with our parameters. And so some of those parameters are, if we have the data from before, I didn't save it out into there because I cleared the console. Heavy sigh, he does. So we will go to the screen itself and we will grab the information that was there. So this is the station ID. And we'll put that into our function call here. And this was the date that the person wanted to grab the data from. So we'll put that here. I would probably make this a like very flexible input field that does some date validation and always converts it to a string. If they pass in a string, again, validate and make sure it's okay too. And now we're going to take that data and we're going to pass it in. And we could change this up, so we will change it up. I'm just validating that the first thing actually worked. So we actually got something back, and we could do, right? So we have that data there. So let's take it, and hopefully if we do it with this, let's say we only want 2017 01 to 2017 12/31, we can now do that. And I believe you can sort of see this, so like year 2001 here. So if in theory this worked, we should be able to see 2017 something. Yeah, 2017 01. So it did take the parameters. There's a lot less stuff there. And by just using this quickly, and we did it while we were talking here, we don't have to go through a bunch of data, go through a bunch of requests, sit and watch things inside a browser. We can just do things normally and be able to capture this information and move forward. So this function that does this conversion for us automatically is not perfect yet. I didn't get everything translated over from the curl converter, but it will be eventually. And if you have, if you try to do this or you're playing with the package and have any questions, definitely file some issues, because the more folks submit issues, the more we know where to target really robust and detailed documentation, especially in getting the setup portion of this. So I hope this was useful, entertaining, and informative for everyone.